If we don't get her to sign while she's still clear, it'll be a nightmare later. I heard my son-in-law say that in my own kitchen. I was standing in the hallway, holding a damp dish towel and staring at the smudge on the wall where the clock used to hang. The clock had been my husband's, shaped like a rooster, always a little fast. They said it was outdated. It left a clean circle when they took it down last summer. Now there was only that smudge I hadn't noticed before, and the sound of Michael's voice carrying through the half-closed door. The furnace had just turned off, so the house was very quiet. I could hear the refrigerator humming and my daughter, Caroline, murmuring something in response that I couldn't quite make out. I live alone in this small town in central Ohio, about 40 minutes outside Columbus, in the same pale yellow house I moved into when I was 27, and the carpet was still orange shag. Caroline has been checking on me more often these days, driving down with Michael on Saturdays, bringing grocery bags and new throw rugs and opinions. Our relationship is polite, I suppose. Careful, like walking around a coffee table with a sharp corner. We don't bump into anything if we both pay attention. I shifted my weight, and the floorboard under my right foot gave that little complaining creak it always has. There was a pause in the kitchen. I imagined Michael glancing at the door, at the shadow of my slippers. "She's not deaf," Caroline said, a bit too loudly, as if to prove something. Then, more softly, "And she's not confused, I told you that." Confused. Clear. Words they had started using about me as if I weren't right down the hall with dishwater still on my hands. I took a breath, tucked the towel over my shoulder the way I've done for 50 years, and pushed the door open with my hip. The November light coming through the small kitchen window was that flat Ohio gray, the kind that makes the yard look like it's been drained of color. Bare maple branches scratched a slow circle on the glass. Caroline was at the table, sorting mail into neat little piles, her mouth pressed tight. Michael stood near the fridge, hands braced on the counter, the kind of posture men use when they feel they're the only sensible ones in the room. On the table between them was my blue ceramic mug, the one with the chip in the handle and a stack of papers held together by a black binder clip. "There you are," Caroline said too brightly. "We were just talking about the turkey. You still want to host Thanksgiving here this year, right?" She had her cheerful nurse voice on, the one she uses at the clinic. I glanced at the papers without moving my head too much. I've learned to do that, to look without looking, the way my late husband used to drive and read road signs at the same time so I wouldn't nag him. I could see a logo at the top of the first page that wasn't from the utility company or the bank. The font was too careful. "It's my house," I said, drying my hands on the towel. "Where else would we have it?" Michael shrugged, opening the fridge and peering in as if he'd never seen its contents before. "We were just saying," he replied, his voice trimmed down now, polite, "that it might be a lot of work for you this year, Joan, with your knee and all." "My knee carried you and your toolbox up those stairs last Christmas when the pipe burst," I said. I kept my tone light, almost teasing. It's a trick you learn in marriage and motherhood, how to speak your mind through a smile so it doesn't start a war. Caroline's eyes flicked up to mine. She does this little twitch with her right eyebrow when she's annoyed but trying not to be. "I told him you'd say that," she said, forcing a little laugh. "Mom, sit down a minute, okay? There are a couple of things I brought from work for you to look at. Just information, nothing scary. Information, not scary. The words were like the labels she used to put on shoeboxes in my hallway closet when she came back from college that first summer, reorganizing my life as repay for having paid her tuition. I pulled out the wooden chair I've sat in for decades, the one with the dent from where my husband, Rich, had once dropped a frying pan on the seat. The kitchen smelled like coffee and lemon dish soap, and faintly like the garlic powder Michael had dumped into the spaghetti last night. Outside, the maple leaves had turned copper weeks ago, then brown, and most of them were now swept into a low, damp pile against the fence. Caroline slid the stack of papers toward me. On top was a glossy brochure with photos of smiling gray-haired couples walking down hallways with art on the walls. Oak Meadows Senior Living, the title said, in a calm, tasteful font. "Caroline," I said. Slowly. "What's this?" "Mom, don't look at me like that," she said immediately. "It's just a brochure. We had a rep come to the clinic, and they left a bunch of these. They have independent units, and then more support if people need it later. It's actually really nice. There's a craft room, and I have a craft room here," I interrupted, nodding toward the dining room where my sewing machine sat covered in a white cloth, and a kitchen, and my own front door. Michael took a carton of eggs out and then put it back, clearly not needing anything in the fridge at all. His presence was like one of those new smart speakers people talk to, always listening even when it pretends not to be. "We're just planning ahead, Mom," Caroline said, smoothing the edge of the brochure like she was petting a small animal. "You know how winters get here, and you fell last January." "I slipped on the ice on the porch because Michael left his boots there," I said, not unkindly. "And I caught myself on the railing. I remember it." The word slipped out of me with more weight than I meant it to have. I remember it. I remember. As if I had to prove it. As if I should start reciting the date and who was president. Caroline looked away, a tiny flush rising along her neck. Michael cleared his throat. "We also brought some paperwork from the bank," he said, tapping the clipped stack beneath the brochure. "Just some forms your advisor recommended, to make sure things are in order. Transfer on death stuff, updating beneficiaries. It's responsible, Joan." He liked to use my name when he wanted to sound respectful. When he was relaxed, I was your mom. When he was trying to sell me something, I became Joan. "I thought my will already took care of that," I said. I could hear the faint metallic tick of the heating pipes under the floor, catching up with the chill that seeped in through the windows. "Didn't Rich and I... We saw that lawyer in town, 8 years ago?" "Things change," Caroline said quickly. "Laws change. And with Dad gone, there are some things you should probably adjust. It's not a big deal, really. It might even make it easier on all of us later." There it was. Easier on all of us. Not safer for you. Not better for you. Easier on them. I know she didn't mean it the way it sounded. Or maybe she did a little. People can love you and still find you inconvenient. That's something I've come to understand in my 70s that I didn't quite see in my 30s. I picked up the pen that lay beside the papers. It was my own pen, the one I keep in the ceramic frog on the table. Caroline must have taken it out. The frog had been Rich's joke gift one Christmas, its mouth open in a permanent, surprised O. "Do we have to talk about this today?" I asked, clicking the pen, then clicking it again. The sound punctured the air. Caroline exhaled. "We don't have to do anything today," she said, "but I'd feel better if we at least went over it. There's this one form where you can add me as a joint owner on your main account, just in case something happens and I need to pay bills while things are in probate. It's really simple, Mom. We already talked to Sandra at the bank." I blinked. "You already talked to the bank? Without me?" "Well, yeah," she said, frowning like I was the one being unreasonable. "I mean, we talked in general terms. We didn't change anything. We were just gathering information so we could help you. You've always said you hate paperwork. I do hate paperwork, the tiny print, the endless lines, the way it always feels like a test you're supposed to fail. But I also hate when things are done about me instead of with me. That's different." "Let me get my glasses," I said. "If we're going to look, then I'm going to look." I stood up slowly. My right knee did ache more in the cold, but I made sure not to wince. As I walked down the hall toward my bedroom, I could hear them talking low behind me. "See," Michael whispered. "She'll do it if you frame it right." "Stop," Caroline hissed. "She's my mother." Their voices dropped to a murmur I couldn't make out. In my bedroom, the air felt a little cooler. The curtains were half closed, so the gray light was gentler here, washing over the faded floral bedspread. On my dresser sat the silver-framed photo of Rich in his bowling shirt, one arm around a trophy, the other around me. We were younger there than Caroline is now. I opened the top drawer and reached past the rolled-up socks to the case where I keep my reading glasses. Next to it was the envelope with my important papers written in Rich's careful block letters. I hesitated for just a second, fingers resting on the edge. We made that envelope together, him sitting at this very dresser with a pen in his hand, asking me if I thought we should tell the kids where it was. "Not yet," I'd said. "Let's not make them start looking at us like we're fragile china." He'd laughed, but he put the envelope in the drawer instead of the closet, as if he'd known I'd want it close. I took my glasses and closed the drawer without pulling the envelope out. Not yet. Back in the kitchen, Carolyn had my checkbook open beside the stack of forms, her brow furrowed. Michael was scrolling through his phone, thumb moving, eyes flicking between the screen and the table. Caroline looked up when she saw me and quickly shut the checkbook, which only drew my attention to it more. "Okay," she said, with forced brightness again. "So this one is the bank form, and this other one is just updating your healthcare proxy. So if anything happens—" "Anything like what?" I asked, lowering myself into the chair and slipping my glasses on. The room became sharper around the edges, every crumb on the table more visible. "Mom," she said, sighing, "you're 78. You live alone. You don't like to think about it, but things can happen. A stroke, a fall, dementia." The word hung in the air like a bad smell. "And if we don't have things set up, it turns into this legal nightmare. I've seen it so many times at the clinic. I'm just trying to make sure that doesn't happen to us." Her eyes were wet at the corners. Genuine. She really did believe she was protecting me. Protecting them. That's the thing. Love and fear make a complicated soup. "I understand planning," I said, and I meant it. "But I also understand people doing things in a hurry and then regretting them later because they didn't read the fine print. Your father always—" My throat tightened, so I took a sip from my coffee mug, now lukewarm. "Your father always read every line twice," I finished. Michael gave a small, impatient smile. "There isn't any trickery here, Joan. It's standard. Millions of people sign these forms every day. We're not talking about selling the house right now or anything. We're just, there it was again. Right now. A door left cracked open. Let me read, I said. I could feel a kind of quiet dread sitting in my chest. Not a loud panic, just a heavy awareness that the ground under my feet might not be as solid as I thought. The first page was all boxes and lines. My name printed in neat black ink at the top, my address, my birth date. Then, add joint account holder. Beneath that, Caroline's full name, her address in New Albany. I thought of the quiet tree-lined street where she lives, all the houses beige and brick, with double garages and wreaths on every door. We'd helped them move there 10 years ago. Rich had carried the heavy dresser up the stairs. I told you we could hire movers, Michael had protested, and Rich had laughed, saying, what else are fathers-in-law for? Now his name was only ink on old documents and the front of his bowling trophies. This makes it so I can help you pay your bills if something happens, Caroline said, pointing to a paragraph about access. Her finger trembled slightly. It doesn't give me full control. We checked. We checked without me. I found myself thinking of the years when Caroline was a teenager, wanting to go to parties, insisting everyone else's parents let them. The way Rich would look at me across the table, silently asking whether we were going to be the strict ones or the cool ones. We were never the cool ones. We made her call when she got there and when she left. We set curfews and stuck to them. She hated us and slammed her door more than once. Later, when she had children of her own, she'd said, I get it now. You were just trying to keep me safe. Funny how quickly that word can pivot, pointed in another direction. Can I take these to Pastor Jim to look at? I asked. He's dealt with estate things at the church, and hasn't his son finished law school now? Caroline's mouth tightened. We already talked to Sandra, she repeated. She's a professional, Mom. No offense to Pastor Jim. Her tone on professional scraped something inside me. When did my judgment become less professional than a woman at the bank who called me sweetie and handed me lollipops for my imaginary grandchildren? I'm not saying I won't do it, I said quietly. I'm saying I won't do it today, not without reading and not without thinking. There was a pause. Michael shifted his weight, the floor giving a little squeak. Caroline's shoulders dropped. Of course, she said after a moment. That's fine. We can just leave them here. She stacked the forms nicely, squaring the corners, and set the pen on top. We worry, Mom. You forget things sometimes. Like when you left the kettle on last month and the smoke alarm went off. I turned it off. Myself, I said. And I called you. I remember that too. A small, almost desperate laugh burst out of me. You see, I remember all the mistakes. Caroline looked guilty. That's not what I meant. She reached out and touched my hand, her thumb rubbing little circles over my knuckles. Her hands are softer than mine, used to typing and examining patients, not scrubbing floors or kneading dough. I'm afraid of getting a phone call, she admitted in a whisper. I'm afraid of losing you and having to figure everything out while we're grieving. I'm trying to spare us both that. I covered her hand with my other one. For a moment, the air in the room felt less sharp. I don't want to make things harder for you, I said. I never did, but I also don't want to disappear into a stack of papers. Her eyes met mine. For a heartbeat, we were just mother and daughter, not patient and caregiver, not liability and manager. Then Michael's phone buzzed, shattering the moment. He glanced at the screen and stepped out into the living room to answer it. "Yeah," I heard him say. "We're here now. No, nothing signed yet." I looked back at Caroline. "Who's he talking to?" I asked. "Probably his brother," she said too quickly. "They've been dealing with their mom's stuff too. It's a lot." I didn't push. Not then. The rest of the afternoon stretched out in those small practical tasks that fill a life. We folded laundry together in the living room, Caroline refolding anything I did that wasn't up to her new standards. She moved the throw rug a little closer to the couch, so you won't trip. She told me I should stop using the step stool in the pantry and call her if I needed anything from the high shelf. I made us all grilled cheese sandwiches for lunch, my way, with butter on the outside and a little mayonnaise on the inside. Michael complimented them, but then suggested we get me one of those countertop air fryers so I wouldn't have to deal with hot pans. I noticed the way his eyes wandered to the stack of papers on the kitchen table every time he walked past. When they left in the early evening, the sun already sinking behind the bare trees, Caroline hugged me longer than usual at the front door. The cold air pushed in around her shoulders. "Please think about it," she murmured into my hair. "I will," I said. Out by the curb, their SUV idled, exhaust rising in pale clouds. I watched them back out of the driveway. Just before they turned the corner, I saw Michael glance at the house in the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable from a distance. When the car disappeared, the quiet settled over me again, thicker now. I closed the door and slid the deadbolt, a habit Rich insisted on, even in this sleepy town where everyone knows everyone. The house felt both too big and exactly right. Every sound echoed just a little. The tick of the kitchen clock they'd left me with, the hum of the fridge, the whisper of my slippers on the hallway carpet. On the table, the papers waited, a neat white rectangle under the overhead light. I stood over them for a long time, my hand braced on the back of the chair. The brochure lay on top, all those smiling faces and bright hallways. It was probably lovely oak meadows. Maybe they served chicken pot pie on Wednesdays and had bridge clubs and movie nights. Maybe there were women like me there with stories and memories and knees that hurt in the cold. But the idea of packing this house into cardboard boxes, of leaving the dented chair and the smudged wall and the maple tree that Rich planted when Caroline was born, it made my stomach twist. I slipped the brochure out from the stack and tucked it under the napkin holder, half out of sight. Then I picked up the forms. The print was small, but my glasses made it sharp enough. Legal phrases curled across the page like ivy. By signing below the undersigned grants. Hereby authorizes. In the event of incapacity. That word again, like a whisper about a future version of me I might never meet, but which everyone else was already planning around. On the second page, in the margin, Caroline had written, in her neat, measured handwriting, "This just means I can help you if needed," with a little heart. The heart almost hurt more than the paragraphs. It was love, but it was also assumption. I flipped through to the last page and saw the blank line where my signature was supposed to go, my name printed beneath it in letters that suddenly looked foreign. I set the stack down and went to the hallway. The carpet runner there was frayed at the edges, and I made a mental note, my own mental note, to sew it before it got worse. In the bedroom, I went back to the top drawer. This time, I pulled out the envelope. Important papers in Rich's writing, still as steady as the day he wrote it. I carried it to the bed and sat down carefully, the springs giving that familiar soft groan. I opened the flap and slid out the contents: the deed to the house, our old life insurance policy, our original wills. There was also an older brochure from the funeral home we'd visited together once, years ago, when he'd been on one of his "we should be prepared" kicks. I smiled despite myself, remembering the way he'd joked about the casket styles, making the funeral director blush. The deed crackled when I unfolded it, the paper thicker, more serious. "This property," it said, "is held in joint tenancy by Richard Allen Parker and Joan Elise Parker." My name, still there next to his, still owning something solid in the world. I traced the letters with my finger. So much of me feels less solid now. My balance, my energy, the way people look at me when I walk into a room. But here, on this paper, there was no question. I thought about Caroline at 8 years old, proudly carrying home a crumpled spelling test with a gold star. About the night she called us crying from her dorm because she'd failed a chemistry exam, and Rich drove 2 hours to bring her chicken soup and a new notebook. About the time she brought Michael home for Christmas, nervous, wanting us to like him. We did. I still do, mostly. People don't turn into villains just because they're afraid. They just stop seeing the full picture sometimes. I gathered the old papers back into the envelope and slid it under the mattress toward the middle. Not because I was hiding it exactly, just because I wanted it somewhere that felt like mine, alone, for a little while longer. Standing there, my back to the dresser, I could see the faint reflection of myself in the darkened window. An old woman in a soft blue cardigan, hair thinner than it used to be, but her eyes still sharp, still her own. I thought about that overheard sentence from the morning. If we don't get her to sign while she's still clear, as if clarity were a faucet they needed to use before it ran dry. I reached up and straightened the frame of Rich's photo on the dresser. "Well, love," I said softly to the empty room, "it seems they're planning my future without asking me how I'd like it wrapped." My voice didn't shake. It surprised me how steady it sounded in the quiet. In the kitchen, the furnace kicked on again, a low rumble rising through the floor. I took off my glasses and held them in my hand, the plastic warm from my skin. I knew, standing there between the old papers and the new ones, that something had shifted, even if only a little. They were planning. I would have to plan too, not just for dying, but for living, in this house or somewhere else, on my own terms as much as possible. And before anyone else put another pen in front of me, I decided I was going to read every single line of whatever they'd brought. And I was going to find someone who would sit beside me and explain it to me, as if I were not a burden or a problem to be solved, but a person whose choices still mattered. That night, I didn't sleep much. The house made its usual noises, the distant rush of the furnace, the soft creak of the hallway as it settled. But instead of comforting me like they usually did, they felt like someone clearing their throat before reading bad news. I lay there on my back, looking at the faint glow of the streetlight on the ceiling, hearing that sentence of Michael's over and over in my mind, like a bit of popcorn hull stuck in my teeth. While she's still clear, around 11, I gave up on sleep. I slid my feet into my slippers and pulled my old robe around myself, the pink one with with the worn elbows that Rich used to call my battle armor. In the kitchen, the clock over the stove said 11:12. The stack of papers was still on the table where I'd left it, a quiet little mountain. I stared at it as if it might grow legs and walk away. Instead, I went to the phone hanging on the wall. The handset cord is still curly and tangled, no matter how many times I straighten it. Caroline keeps telling me to get rid of it and use just the cell phone, but I like the weight of the old receiver in my hand. It feels more anchored. For a minute, I just stood there, pressing my fingers into the smooth plastic, wondering who I could call at this hour. Pastor Jim? Too late? Sandra at the bank? Ridiculous. That left one person who kept peculiar hours by choice, not by necessity. I dialed Helen's number from memory. My neighbor, 2 houses down, the one with the fat orange cat and the louder-than-necessary wind chimes. She's been my friend for 30 years, through PTA meetings and funerals and bunion surgeries. It rang 3 times. I was about to hang up when she answered, her voice a little breathless. "Hello?" "It's me," I said. "Joan, sorry it's late." There was a rustle, like she was shifting in her chair or pushing the cat off her lap. "Oh, honey, it's fine. I was just watching some awful movie where everyone's prettier than they have any right to be. What's going on?" I hesitated, my thumb tracing the crack in the countertop beside the phone. I hadn't planned what I was going to say, only that I couldn't hold it alone in my head anymore. "Do you ever feel like people are talking about your life as if you're not in the room?" I asked. Helen gave a short, knowing laugh. "All the time. My daughter tried to put one of those tracking apps on my phone last month. Said it was for emergencies, but it felt like I was a teenager on probation. Why? What happened?" The words came out of me in a slow, uneven stream. I told her about the brochure, about the forms, about Michael's remark in the kitchen, and the whispered phone call in the living room. I didn't dramatize it. I just laid the pieces out like ingredients on the counter. She listened, making small noises now and then. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. I could hear, faintly, the tinkling of her wind chimes outside her window, even at this hour. "You know they love you," she said finally. "Caroline's a good girl. She always has been." "I know," I said, and I did. But, she echoed. "Love doesn't always show up in the way we want. Sometimes it shows up like someone rearranging your kitchen without asking and then telling you it's for your own good." "She actually did move my spices last year," I said, and we both chuckled, the sound a little wobbly. Then my laughter died. "Do you think I'm being stubborn?" "Joan," she said, and I could hear her shifting into her no-nonsense tone. "You are stubborn. I'm stubborn. We're allowed. We've earned it. But there's a difference between being stubborn and being steamrolled. That house is yours. Those papers are about you. You're allowed to understand them, to take your time, to say no even." I swallowed. Hearing someone else say it made it seem more real. "Caroline said they talked to the woman at the bank already," I murmured. "Like I'm a patient they're consulting on." "Then you talked to someone too," Helen replied. "Not just the pastor, though he's a dear. Someone whose job it is to look out for you. Weren't you saying Pastor Jim's son passed the bar last year? What's his name? Evan?" "Yes," I said slowly, picturing Evan's lanky form up on the stage last Easter, home from law school, reading the scripture with that slightly embarrassed half-smile young men get when they realize the whole congregation remembers them at 10 with a bowl haircut. I don't want to make a big drama, I added quickly, hearing my own reflex to minimize. Oh, for heaven's sake, making a phone call isn't a drama, Helen said. It's common sense. You can love your children and still double-check what someone's putting in front of your pen, especially when there's a house involved, when they did all that with my brothers. Place after his stroke, it got ugly because no one had clarified anything. Learn from my mess, okay? I remembered that time, the hushed conversations in the back pews about probate and power of attorney, the way Helen had looked a little smaller for a while, like someone had turned down the brightness on her. All right, I said softly. I'll call him. Evan. Maybe after church tomorrow. I'll ask Pastor Jim first. Good, she said. And Joan? Yes? You're not crazy, she said, and you're not confused. Don't let anyone make you question what you hear with your own ears. My throat tightened in that instant, hot and surprising. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that until she said it. Thank you, I murmured. Now go get some sleep, she ordered gently. We've got a long sermon to sit through in the morning. After I hung up, the kitchen felt different somehow. Not bigger or smaller, just not as empty. I put the receiver back in its cradle and rested my hand on the wall for a moment, feeling the faint vibration of the furnace through the plaster. Then I walked back to bed, and eventually sleep found me in little pockets. Sunday morning came gray and damp. Ohio in November doesn't apologize for itself. It just settles in. The maple tree out front dripped quietly onto the sidewalk. I pulled on my good slacks and the navy cardigan Caroline had bought me last Christmas. So you'll have something decent for church, she'd said. In the mirror by the front door, I dabbed some of my old lipstick on. The color has no name on the tube anymore, just a number worn half away, but it's been mine for so long it feels like part of my face. At church, the air smelled of old hymnals and coffee in styrofoam cups. The sanctuary lights buzzed faintly. I slipped into my usual spot halfway back on the aisle. Helen slid in beside me a few minutes later, her orange cat hair clinging to her black coat. She gave my hand a quick squeeze, her eyes searching mine in a silent question. I nodded just once. During the sermon, Pastor Jim talked about the parable of the talents, about being faithful with what we're given. His voice rolled over us in familiar cadences. I watched dust motes dance in the shafts of light from the high windows and thought about what I'd been given. This house, this body, this brain that sometimes misplaced words but still found its way home. This daughter who sat 3 rows ahead of me with her husband and their 2 kids. Caroline kept glancing down at her phone, hiding it in her lap, the way teenagers used to. Michael sat straight-backed, one arm draped over the pew behind their son, Tyler, who was coloring quietly on the back of the bulletin. Little Emma had her head on Caroline's shoulder, thumb in her mouth. When the offertory ended and we stood for the closing hymn, Caroline finally turned and noticed me. She smiled, surprised, and mouthed, "Hi, Mom," like I'd appeared from nowhere. Afterward, in the fellowship hall, people milled around with coffee and store-bought cookies. Someone's toddler was crying near the coat rack. The big clock on the wall, inexplicably another rooster, ticked loudly. I waited my turn to speak to Pastor Jim, who was currently listening to Mrs. Turner complain about the new carpet in the choir room. When he was free, he turned to me with that open, slightly tired smile pastors get. "Joan," he said warmly, "good to see you. How's that knee holding up in this weather?" "It complains more than I do," I said. "Do you have a minute? Actually, maybe two?" His eyes sharpened a little, kindness still there, but now coupled with attention. "Of course," he said. "Let's step into my office where it's a bit quieter." Helen caught my eye as I passed and gave me a thumbs up so small no one else would have seen it. In his office, the air smelled like old paper and peppermint. There were stacks of books on the floor and a crooked picture of his grandchildren on the credenza. He closed the door behind us, but didn't sit at his desk, like he knew that would feel too formal. Instead, he took the armchair opposite the one he gestured me into. "What's on your mind?" he asked. I took a breath. "It's about some paperwork," I said. "And about getting older, I suppose." His expression softened even more. "Go on." So I did. Not every detail, but enough. The brochure, the forms, the bank conversation I hadn't been part of, Michael's sentence in my kitchen, the way I'd felt standing between my old papers and the new ones. When I finished, he steepled his fingers, thoughtful. "You're certainly not the first person to sit in that chair with this kind of situation," he said. "And you won't be the last. Our kids worry about us, and sometimes that worry turns into overmanagement." "They mean well," I said. Automatically, hearing Caroline's defensive little "mom" in my head. "Meaning well and doing well aren't always the same," he said gently. "The important thing is that you still have your wits about you, and you do." He held my gaze firmly. "You have every right to understand what you're signing, to have your own representation, so to speak." "Helen mentioned Evan," I ventured. "Not because he's your son, but because she said he knows about these things." Pastor Jim's face eased into a smile. "He does," he said. "He's working with a small firm in Columbus now, mostly elder law and estates, things like that. I'd be happy to ask him to give you a call if you like, or I can give you his card and you can reach out. No pressure either way." The idea of waiting for a call made me feel oddly passive, like a patient waiting to be told when her test results came in. I wanted suddenly to be the one who dialed. "I'd like his card," I said. "I'll call him." Something flickered in his eyes. Approval, maybe. He stood and rummaged through a drawer in his desk, which was more organized than the rest of the room. "Here we are," he said, handing me a small white card. "And Joan?" "Yes?" "Whatever you decide, make sure it's because you're at peace about it," he said. "Not because you were pushed into a corner. God gave you discernment. It doesn't retire at 78. I laughed quietly at that. "Thank you," I said, slipping the card into my cardigan pocket with fingers that felt steadier than they had the night before. When I emerged from the office, Caroline was waiting near the coffee urn, Emma now clinging to her leg. "There you are," she said. "I didn't know you were coming today. You should have called. We could have picked you up." "I like driving myself," I said. "Gives me a sense of purpose." Michael was by the cookie table, talking to a man I recognized vaguely from somewhere, tall, well-dressed, with a realtor's smile. When he saw me looking, he gave a small wave that suggested he knew who I was, even if I couldn't place him. "We were going to head to brunch," Caroline continued. "Want to join us? The kids would love it." "That sounds nice," I said, "as long as we're not going somewhere loud." "We'll go to Mel's," she said, already half turning toward the door. In the car, Emma chattered about her school art project, and Tyler explained something about a video game that sounded like aliens and math. I let their voices wash over me like a kind of music. At the diner, the waitress knew my name and brought coffee without asking. The air smelled like bacon and syrup. Caroline ordered an egg white omelet with vegetables and no cheese. Michael got the lumberjack special, which made the kids giggle. I ordered pancakes. "Mom, you know those make your sugar spike," Caroline said automatically when the waitress walked away. I lifted an eyebrow. "It's Sunday," I said, "and I'm not a diabetic, last I checked." She flushed. "I just worry," she murmured. "You worry about everything," I said, softer than it sounded. "Someone has to," she replied, and there was no humor in it. The conversation drifted to the usual topics: school, the weather, the church's new youth program. But under the words, I could feel an undercurrent, like a river running beneath ice. At one point, Michael excused himself to make a call. I watched him through the window as he stepped outside, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing with his free hand. A few minutes later, the man from church, the one with the realtor's smile, drove by slowly in a shiny SUV, gave a quick honk, and waved. Michael waved back, then turned a little away from the window, his shoulders hunching as if to block my view. I pretended to be deeply interested in Emma's drawing of a unicorn on her napkin. When he came back, he was cheerful, almost too cheerful. "So, Mom," he said, picking up the thread of conversation we hadn't left off on. "Caroline and I were thinking maybe we could come down next weekend again, help you go through some of the clutter in the basement. You know, get ahead of things before winter really sets in." Clutter. That word pricked me. "There are Christmas decorations down there," I said, "and the train set your father insisted on buying when Tyler was born." "Exactly," he said, "and broken lamps and boxes of old magazines and who knows what else. It would be good to sort it out." He said it kindly enough, but there was an efficiency underneath it. A man eyeing a storage unit he was already planning to empty. Caroline stirred her coffee. "It's just, the more we wait, the harder it gets," she said quietly. "For you and for us." I considered my next words carefully. "I've been thinking too," I said, "about the paperwork." Michael's gaze sharpened. "Yeah?" "I'm going to have someone look it over with me," I said. "Someone who's not emotionally involved. A lawyer." Caroline's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "We already talked to Sandra," she said, her voice tight. "I know," I said. "You talked to her. This is for me." A flush rose up her neck again, this time darker. "Do you not trust us?" she asked. There it was, the question I'd known would come. The one that would cast me as either grateful or ungrateful, cooperative or difficult. I put my fork down. "I trust that you love me," I said slowly. "I trust that you think you're doing what's best. And I also trust that I have the right to understand and to ask my own questions. That's all this is." Michael's jaw tightened just for a second before he forced a neutral smile. "Of course," he said. "That's totally fine. We didn't want to dump a bunch of complicated things on you all at once. We were trying to make it easier." "I know," I repeated. There was a beat of silence. Tyler asked if he could have more syrup. The world continued, as it always does, even when something important has just shifted by a fraction of an inch. After brunch, they drove me back home. In the driveway, Caroline unbuckled her seatbelt and twisted around to look at me. "Just tell us what the lawyer says, okay?" she said. "We're all on the same team." I nodded, thinking of how teams sometimes have disagreements about which play to run. "I'll keep you informed," I said. Inside the house, the quiet felt different again, less oppressive, more like expectancy. I hung my coat on the hook by the door and went straight to the kitchen. The card from Evan was still in my pocket. I took it out and smoothed it on the table. The phone on the wall seemed to hum at me, patient. For a moment, I considered waiting until the next day, telling myself it was Sunday and people deserved their rest. Then I remembered how much time other people had already spent making calls about my life without me. I picked up the receiver and dialed the number on the card. It rang 4 times, and I was about to lose my nerve when a young voice answered, warm but professional. "This is Evan James." "Evan, it's Joan Parker," I said. "Pastor Jim's Joan. I hope it's not a bad time." "Oh, Mrs. Parker," he said, the tone shifting, becoming more familiar. "Not at all. Is everything okay?" I could hear faint sounds behind him, maybe a TV or a dishwasher. Sunday at home for him, too. "I won't keep you long," I said. I have some documents my daughter and son-in-law brought me about my accounts and my house. They say it's standard. I'm sure they're right. But I'd like someone to go through them with me, just for my peace of mind. Your father gave me your card." There was a pause, then the kind of cautious sympathy I've heard in Caroline's voice when she talks to patients. "I'm glad you called," he said. "I do a lot of that kind of review work. We can absolutely set up a time. I don't want to talk specifics over the phone today, but if you're free this week, I could come to you, save you the trip into Columbus." The offer took me aback. I'd expected the usual. Make an appointment, drive, park in a lot I'd get lost in. "That's kind of you," I said. "I don't want to pull you away from your weekend." He chuckled. "Honestly, you're saving me from my laundry. How does Tuesday at 10 sound?" I glanced at the calendar by the fridge, even though I knew Tuesday was wide open like most of my days now. "That works," I said. "Good," he replied. "Just have whatever documents they gave you ready. And Mrs. Parker, bring any older papers, too. Wills, deeds, that sort of thing. We'll look at the whole picture. No charge for the first visit, so don't worry about that." I hadn't even thought about the cost yet. But when he said it, a knot I hadn't realized was there loosened. "Thank you," I said. "Really." "You're welcome," he said. "And I'll say the same thing I say to all my clients. There are no dumb questions in my line of work. We'll take it at your pace." When I hung up, I stood there with the receiver still in my hand, the dial tone buzzing gently. Tuesday at 10. Someone coming into my house. Not to fix a pipe or deliver a package, but to sit at my table and talk to me as if my decisions carried weight. I set the phone down and looked around the kitchen. The afternoon light was slanting in now, making the smudge where the rooster clock had hung even more visible. I walked over and touched it with my thumb, the faint roughness of it under my skin. I should repaint that, I murmured to myself. But I didn't move to get the paint. Instead, I went to the bedroom and slid my hand under the mattress, retrieving the envelope Rich had labeled. The paper felt cool and solid. I carried it back to the kitchen and set it beside the newer stack. Old life, new paperwork, past decisions, current pressures. For a moment, I just stood there, the two piles like bookends in front of me. Then I pulled out a yellow highlighter from the ceramic frog and uncapped it with a small, decisive pop. I've never been a highlighter person. That was always Caroline in college, color-coding her notes. But now, as I sat down and pulled the bank forms toward me, I liked the idea of marking what I didn't understand, of leaving a visible trail of my questions. I started reading, slowly, carefully. Every time a phrase made my eyebrows knit, I drew a soft line beneath it, the yellow bright against the black ink. It was tedious, yes, but it was also oddly satisfying, like untangling a necklace knot. After a while, my neck started to ache. I stood, stretched, made myself a cup of tea. While the kettle boiled, I looked out the window at the maple tree. A gust of wind shook a few stubborn leaves free, sending them spinning to the ground. Across the street, Mr. Jenkins was wrestling a plastic lawn chair into his garage, muttering to himself. Life going on, ordinary and unremarkable. In the middle of all this ordinariness, something in me had taken a step I hadn't taken in a long time. Not a big step, just the kind where you shift your weight from one foot to the other and realize you don't have to stand exactly where someone else placed you. The kettle whistled, a sharp reminder that water can only hold so much heat before it demands attention. I turned off the burner and poured the water over the tea bag in my cup, watching the color bloom. As I carried the mug back to the table, my cell phone buzzed on the counter, flashing Caroline's name. I froze for a second, the mug warm in my hands. It could be nothing, just a check-in or a picture of Emma's drawing, or it could be her wanting to know what I'd decided already before I'd had a chance to breathe. I set the mug down and picked up the phone. For a moment, my thumb hovered over the green button. Then, without entirely knowing why, I pressed the side button instead and watched the screen go dark, the buzzing stop. I'd call her back, of course. I wasn't going to play games, but not right this second. Not while my head was full of paragraphs and my heart was still trying to find its balance. I placed the phone face down on the table beside the highlighted pages and the old deed and took a slow sip of tea. It was strong and a little bitter, the way I like it. And as the heat spread through my chest, I let myself feel fully the small but important fact that for the first time in a while, the next move, even if it was just how to phrase a question on Tuesday at 10, was going to be mine. So I sat there, the phone, my daughter's name, had just flashed on, lying face down beside my tea, and I realized how strange and powerful it felt to let a call go for a moment and think first instead of rushing to make her comfortable. And that small act hummed in me all the way into Monday, when the sky stayed the same low gray, the maple tree out front bare as bone, and the mail slot clapping now and then with catalogs and thin white envelopes, none of them as heavy as the papers on my kitchen table. On Monday, I did my little routines, made oatmeal, wiped the counters, watered the plant by the sink that refuses to die no matter how forgetful I get. And every time I passed the table, I felt the highlighted lines looking at me, waiting for Tuesday at 10 like a doctor's appointment you half dread and half long for. And I found myself rehearsing questions under my breath while folding dish towels. Little things like, does this make it so they can sell without me? And what happens if I say no? That felt almost too bold to imagine saying out loud. So I said them to the vacuum cleaner instead, which hummed dutifully and didn't argue. That night I slept better, not because anything was solved yet, but because somewhere on the other end of time there was a young man with a briefcase who had promised to sit at my table and explain my life on paper back to me as if I still owned it, and hope, it turns out, is a surprisingly good sleep aid when you're 78 and trying not to become invisible in your own kitchen. Tuesday morning, I was up before the alarm on my bedside clock, the red numbers blinking 6:07 when my eyes opened, and the house felt almost expectant, as if the walls knew a stranger was coming to look at their secrets. So I moved a slow circuit through the rooms, straightening a pile of magazines here, dusting the edge of the TV there, not because I thought Evan cared about a little dust, but because I cared about what my house said about me. I even took a damp cloth to that smudge on the kitchen wall where the rooster clock had hung, but it only lightened, didn't disappear. So I left it, a faint ghost of itself, a reminder that not everything can be wiped away clean just because somebody thinks it's outdated. And when I checked the stove knobs twice and the bathroom mirror once, I don't know why, habit maybe, Rich always used to check the mirrors before company came, saying, "People see themselves here, Joe. Make it kind." The clock over the stove said 9:47. At 9:58, the driveway gravel crunched, and a silver sedan I didn't recognize eased in behind my old Buick, and I watched from the front window as a tall, slightly rumpled man in a navy blazer climbed out, juggling a leather satchel and a travel mug, his hair sticking up a little on one side like someone who still hadn't learned how to fight with his pillow and win. And when he rang the bell, I had a silly, fleeting thought that he looked younger than some of the sweaters in my closet. "Mrs. Parker," he said when I opened the door, his breath making small clouds in the cold, his glasses fogged at the edges. "That's me," I replied, stepping back to let him in, the familiar smell of my hallway, old wood and lemon polish, meeting the fresh coffee on his coat. "And before you say anything else, call me Joan, please, or I'll feel like I'm about to be scolded by a principal." He smiled, shoulders relaxing a notch, and that alone made me think I'd called the right person, because people who can follow such small directions often know how to handle the bigger ones. In the kitchen, he paused, taking in the table with its twin stacks of paper, the neat bank forms edged with my yellow highlighter strokes, and the worn envelope with Rich's block letters. And he set his satchel down carefully, as if not to disturb whatever fragile balance they were holding. "All right," he said, sliding into the chair across from mine and taking out a legal pad. "Why don't you just tell me, in your own words, what's worrying you the most?" And there was something about that phrasing, "in your own words," that loosened something tight in my chest. So I told him, starting not with the forms, but with the overheard sentence in my kitchen, and the way my name had sounded in their mouths like a problem to be solved before I spoiled. And then about the brochure with the smiling couples, and the note in the margin with Caroline's little heart, and the realtor-looking man at church waving at Michael outside the diner. As I spoke, Evan didn't interrupt, just jotted an occasional word on his pad. Joint act, facility brochure, realtor. And when I finished, my tea gone lukewarm again, he took a breath. "Okay," he said, and his voice was calm, not dismissive. "First, I want to say it's good you called. It's not paranoid. It's not ungrateful. It's responsible. A lot of people sign things they don't understand because they're afraid of seeming difficult, and that never ends well. And hearing a man younger than my daughter say that, in my kitchen, made me feel seen in a way Caroline's worry hadn't, because this wasn't about whether I was a good mother. It was about whether I was still a person. He pulled the bank form toward him, scanning the paragraphs I'd so carefully underlined, and his eyebrows lifted slightly at one section. "So," he said, tapping the page near the top, "this part is, more or less, what your daughter described, adding her as a joint holder so she can pay bills if anything happens. That's not inherently sinister. Lots of families do it. But down here," his finger moved to a paragraph I'd felt prickly about, without fully knowing why. "This language means she has equal ownership of the funds now, not just after you pass away. She can withdraw, close, move things around, and legally the bank will treat any action she takes as if it were your own. That may never be a problem if everybody's on the same page and there are no divorces, bankruptcies, or lawsuits. But life has a way of throwing curveballs, and joint accounts can get messy in ways people don't expect." My stomach fluttered uneasily. "Caroline would never steal from me," I said more to myself than to him, and he nodded quickly. "I'm not suggesting she would," he said. "Intent matters, but structure matters too. Sometimes it's not intentional at all. It's a garnishment or a spouse's debt or a misunderstanding about what's already theirs. What I'm saying is, this gives more power and exposure than you might think, and you're allowed to ask whether that's what you want." "What are the alternatives?" I asked, the question I'd rehearsed while vacuuming finally out in the air. He smiled faintly. "Good question. You could sign a limited power of attorney that allows her to act for you only under certain conditions, or set up a separate, smaller account where you keep just enough for monthly bills and add her there, leaving your savings in an account that stays in your sole name. There are ways to give someone a spare key without handing over the whole house, so to speak. And I liked that metaphor, the house as my account, because sitting in my own kitchen, it felt too apt to ignore." He picked up the healthcare proxy next, reading the dense paragraphs that had made my eyes cross. "This one," he said, "is more standard. It names Caroline as your primary healthcare agent, which makes sense given what she does for a living. The only thing I'd tweak is maybe adding a secondary, someone you trust, so the burden doesn't fall entirely on her. And so if the two of you have a disagreement, there's another voice. That could be Michael, but it doesn't have to be. It could be Helen, could be me, could be a cousin. The point is, you get to decide." I thought of Helen and her wind chimes and her no-nonsense voice on the phone. "I'll ask her," I said slowly, imagining her snorting and saying, "Only if I get veto power over bad boyfriends," and feeling oddly comforted by that. When we had gone through everything they'd brought, he leaned back in his chair. "Now, has anyone talked to you about changing the deed to the house?" he asked casually, and my body reacted before my brain did. I felt my shoulders go tight, my fingers curl around my mug. "No," I said carefully. "Not yet. Why?" He tapped his pen on the pad, thinking. "Because there's a note here in the margin," he said, turning the page so I could see, in a different handwriting. "This looks like Sandra's, maybe. Next, discuss TOD on house. Possible transfer to daughter plus son-in-law. And that name you mentioned, the man at church, I recognize it. He's a realtor Michael's brother works with. I've seen his yard signs all over town. None of that is illegal or even necessarily improper, but combined with them bringing you this, without inviting you into the earlier conversations, it tells me they're planning for a scenario where this house is for sure sold sooner rather than later. Again, maybe that's practical. Maybe it's driven by fear, But it's your house. The question is, does that match what you want? My heart thudded loud enough that I heard it in my ears. The room seemed to sharpen around the edges. I thought of the maple tree, of the dented chair, of the envelope under my mattress, and suddenly the idea of that smiling realtor walking through my living room, pointing out potential to strangers, made my skin prickle. I don't want to give anyone the power to sell it without me, I said, surprising myself with how firm it came out. I might choose to sell one day if it becomes too much, but I want that to be my choice, not something that happens because I signed a paragraph I didn't understand. Evan's gaze met mine, steady and respectful. Then we don't sign anything that does that, he said simply. We can update your will if you like, clarify who gets what when you're gone, but we don't need to mess with the deed now to accomplish that. In fact, leaving things as they are might protect you more than some of the simplification people push. The biggest thing, Joan, is that you don't let anyone rush you. Pressure is a red flag, even when it's wrapped in good intentions. The phrase wrapped in good intentions landed with a distinct weight. Carolyn's anxious face flashed in my mind, the curve of the little heart she'd drawn. She was wrapping all of this in her worry, her patient's horror stories, her constant scanning for disaster. But underneath, there was something else. Michael's spreadsheets, maybe, or their own aging parents, or that tight look he got when the word money came up. I swallowed. If I don't sign this, will it make things harder for them when I die? I asked quietly. He softened. Some things will be more cumbersome, yes, like probate. But there are ways to streamline that without handing over everything now, and there are worse things than paperwork, he said, like being pushed into arrangements that don't respect your autonomy. The law cares about your wishes, Joan, but it can only enforce what it knows. That's why we write things down clearly. By the time he left, an hour and a half later, my head was buzzing, but not in that helpless, lost way it had when Caroline first spread the forms out. It was a full buzz, like when you've cleaned out a closet and everything's on the bed in piles, chaotic but visible. We'd agreed that he would draft an alternative set of documents, a limited power of attorney for finances that only triggered if 2 doctors agreed I was incapacitated, a healthcare proxy that named Caroline first and Helen second, language in my will that stated explicitly I wished to remain in my home as long as it was safe, and that any decision to sell should be made only with my consent, or, if I'd truly lost my mind, with the agreement of a neutral third party too. I can be the bad guy if you want, he'd said as he stood in the doorway, shrugging his coat on. You can tell them your lawyer advised against certain things. Sometimes it's easier to blame the attorney than to have it look like you're rejecting your kids. I'm used to it, and I'd smiled, appreciating his blunt kindness. Maybe we'll share the blame, I replied. I'm old enough to take a little heat. And as I watched his car back down the driveway, I felt that strange mixture of empowerment and guilt settle in. A sense that I'd stepped toward myself and away from something my daughter wanted. And both of those truths hurt in different ways. I didn't have to wait long to deal with that. Around 4, when the early November dusk was already pooling in the corners of the living room, my phone rang again, Caroline on the screen, and this time I picked up on the second ring. Hi, sweetheart, I said, tucking it between my ear and shoulder as I straightened the throw pillows nobody but me ever disturbed. Hey, Mom, she said, her voice tired in that way it gets when the clinic's been busy. I could hear faint background noise, a door closing, someone calling her name. "Sorry I missed you yesterday. I tried calling. Everything okay?" I hesitated just long enough for her to notice. She's always been able to hear the spaces as much as the words. "Everything's in motion," I said. "I had a visitor today. Pastor Jim's son came by, the lawyer. We went over those papers you brought." There was a rustle, like she was setting something down hard. "You what?" she said, sharper than she probably intended. "Mom, why wouldn't you tell me you were doing that?" "Because I didn't want to talk myself out of it before I'd even started," I replied, forcing my tone to stay even. "And because some of the conversations about those papers happened without me, I thought I was allowed one of my own." There was a long exhale on the other end. "We were trying to help you," she said eventually, the same refrain, but this time there was hurt braided into it, not just insistence. "I know," I said, sinking into my armchair. "Evan knows too. He said a lot of families do it this way. But he also showed me some things I didn't understand, and we worked out some alternatives that feel better to me. I'd like to show them to you. Maybe you and Michael could come down on Saturday, without the kids. I don't want them sitting through a grown-up conversation about their grandmother's mortality." That last bit made her huff a small involuntary laugh, which softened the edges. "Okay," she said after a pause. "Saturday's fine, but Mom, I wish you'd trusted us enough to tell us before you called a lawyer. It feels like you went behind our backs." "And how do you think it felt?" I asked quietly. "To hear my son-in-law talking about getting me to sign things while I'm still clear in my own kitchen, or to find notes about my house on a form I hadn't even seen. Trust is a two-way street, Caroline. I'm just finally stepping into my lane." There was silence, and in that silence I could hear the weight of everything unsaid between us. Her resentment at being the responsible one, my resentment at being treated like a fragile project, both of us terrified of different kinds of loss. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer. "We'll be there Saturday," she said. "Can I bring anything?" "Just yourself," I replied, then added, because old habits die hard, "and maybe those pumpkin muffins Tyler likes. It wouldn't hurt to have something sweet on the table." Saturday arrived with a thin film of frost on the grass, the kind that crunches underfoot and makes you pull your sleeves down over your wrists. I spent the morning making a pot roast that filled the house with that slow, rich smell that used to bring Caroline down from her room, even when she was a moody teenager pretending not to like us. As the beef simmered, I laid out the documents on the kitchen table again, this time with Evan's draft copies clipped neatly to the originals, and I put on a fresh tablecloth, the good one, with the stitched leaves that my mother had given me the year Rich and I bought this house. Around 11, Helen popped her head in the back door without knocking, as she has for decades, her orange cat weaving around her ankles. "How's the courtroom in here?" she asked, eyeing the paper piles. "Less dramatic than a Law and Order, I hope," I said. "They're coming." And I realized my hands were trembling a little as I straightened the salt and pepper shakers for the third time. She noticed, of course. "Do you want me to stick around?" she asked. "I can pretend I just happened to drop in with a casserole and then, oops, guess I'll just sit quietly over here with my excellent hearing." The image made me smile, easing some of the tightness in my chest. Thank you, I said. But no, I think I need to do this with just us. Though, if you hear sirens and see me being wheeled out on a stretcher, feel free to claim all my china. She snorted. If I hear sirens, I'll assume you finally told Michael what you really think of his driving, she replied, then grew serious. You've got this, Joe. Remember what you told me when I had to tell my brother no about moving in here? You said you're allowed to guard the life you built. That goes for you too. After she left, the house felt still again, but not empty. Her words lingered like the smell of her perfume. When Caroline's car pulled into the driveway just after noon, I watched them from the window, noting immediately that the kids weren't with them. That alone told me they understood this was not a casual visit. Michael's shoulders were tense as he got out, his jaw set. Caroline looked like she hadn't slept well, shadows under her eyes. I opened the door before they could knock. Come in, I said, stepping aside. It's cold. The pot roast will dry out if we stand here glaring at each other in the doorway. Carolyn gave a weak smile at that, slipping past me into the warmth. Michael muttered a hello, his eyes flicking briefly to the kitchen table where the papers lay like a third party at the meeting. We sat, each of us in our usual spots, but the seating felt formal now. I placed Evan's new documents on top of the old ones, the stapled corners crisp. So, Caroline said after a beat, folding her hands in front of her like a patient at their own consultation. Tell us what this lawyer of yours thinks we did wrong. He didn't say you did anything wrong, I corrected gently. He said you did what many adult children do, tried to make things simpler in ways that also made them more powerful. He thinks I have the right to decide what level of simplicity and what level of power I'm comfortable with. Michael snorted softly, an almost inaudible sound, but not invisible. Look, he said, leaning forward, we're not trying to take anything from you, Joan. We're trying to avoid a financial and legal mess if something happens. I've watched my parents' situation. It's a disaster. We're just trying not to repeat it. I know you're scared, I said, surprising him into silence. You're in that middle place, worrying about your kids' tuition and your parents' hips and your own retirement. And the numbers never quite add up. I'm not blind to that. But when you talk about my house with a realtor behind my back, and when you talk about getting me to sign things while I'm still clear, it feels less like help and more like I'm a ticking bomb you're trying to defuse before I explode and make a mess on your nice floors. Caroline's mouth fell open slightly. You heard that? She whispered, color draining from her face. Yes, I said simply. In my kitchen. I'm not as quiet as you think. And this house has thin walls. If that's how you talk when you think I'm in the room, I worry about how you talk when you think I'm not anywhere at all. She pressed her fingers to her eyes for a moment, then dropped her hands, looking straight at me, letting me see the raw, messy fear there. I'm sorry, she said, voice breaking. That was awful. I was stressed, and Michael was pushing, and No one forced those words into your mouth, Michael cut in, but there wasn't much heat in it. More a reflex than conviction. She shot him a look. No, she agreed. They're mine, and I'm ashamed of them. I don't think of you as a bomb, Mom. I think of you as my whole childhood. And the idea of losing pieces of you without warning terrifies me. I see it every week at work, daughters showing up with blank faces because their mothers didn't plan anything, and now everything is 10 times harder. And her voice wobbled again. I don't want to be standing in some cold office one day, making decisions while I'm sobbing, and a banker is telling me I should have gotten things signed when she was still clear. So I'm trying to get ahead of it, and apparently in the process, I'm steamrolling you, and I'm sorry. The honesty of it, the way she didn't make excuses, made my throat ache. This was the little girl who used to grip my hand so tight on the first day of school, the teenager who once cried in my lap. Over a boy who'd moved away, she was still in there under the professional armor. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "Fear does strange things. It makes you rearrange other people's furniture without asking if they liked it where it was. But I need you to understand something, Caroline. Even if my memory gets worse, I'm still me. And right now, my memory is good enough to know that I deserve to understand what I'm signing, and to say no when something doesn't sit right." I slid Evan's drafts across the table. "These," I said, "are what I'm willing to sign. A limited financial power of attorney that only activates if two doctors agree I can't manage. A health care proxy with you and Helen listed. A will that spells out exactly what happens to the house and everything else when I'm gone. I am not adding anyone as a joint owner on my main account, and I am not changing the deed to the house. If one day I decide to move, whether to Oak Meadows or to a condo or to your basement, I will decide that with you, not for you, and not because you lined up a realtor before I had had my coffee." Michael's eyes flicked to the name at the bottom of the page, recognizing Evan's firm. "He's going to milk you for fees," he muttered, but the fight had mostly gone out of his voice. "First visit was free," I said, unable to resist the petty satisfaction of that. "After that, well, I'd rather pay someone whose job it is to protect my interests than save a little money and lose myself in the process." Caroline reached for the documents, scanning the first page, her brow furrowing in concentration. "This still protects us if something happens," she said slowly, almost to herself. "It's just more boundaries." "Exactly," I said. "You get enough control to help when I truly can't, not when I'm just being inconvenient. I still get to write checks and buy birthday presents and decide when to repaint the living room." "Please don't repaint the living room," Michael murmured, glancing at the beige walls. "I finally got used to this color." The remark was so unexpectedly silly that we all laughed, the tension breaking like a thin sheet of ice over a creek. After a moment, Caroline sobered. "You said Helen's on here as your second," she said. "Why not Michael?" "Because if you and Michael disagree, I don't want him stuck between his wife and his mother-in-law. That's not fair to anyone," I said. "And because Helen has no stake in the house. She loves me, and she'll tell you if you're being unreasonable. You know she will." Caroline winced but nodded. "That's true," she admitted. "She once told me my haircut made me look like a weather girl from the 80s. "It did," I said, and for a second we were just two women laughing about bad haircuts. They read through Evan's drafts more carefully then, asking questions here and there, some of which I referred back to my notes. Every time they addressed a concern, I felt a little less like a child at their parent-teacher conference and a little more like a partner. By the time we'd gone through everything, the pot roast had filled the house with such insistently good smells that even Michael's anxiety couldn't keep his stomach from growling audibly. "Stay for lunch," I said. "Nothing in these papers will go anywhere in an hour, and I made too much food for one person anyway." They did, and the conversation over the meal turned gradually from legal language to lighter things. The kids' Christmas lists, a funny story from the clinic, the time Rich had oversalted the gravy so badly we'd had to pretend the mashed potatoes were a new kind of preserved delicacy. Afterward, when they were putting on their coats, Caroline lingered by the smudge on the wall where the rooster clock had hung. "You know," she said, running her fingers over it, "I shouldn't have bullied you into taking that silly clock down. Dad loved that ridiculous thing." "I kept it," I said, nodding toward the hall closet, "in case I ever missed being woken up 15 minutes early every day." She smiled. "Maybe we should put it back up," she said, "just for the holidays." "Maybe we should," I agreed, and when the door closed behind them, I stood in the quiet house that now felt less threatened and more like itself again, and I realized that something fundamental had shifted. Not that the future was suddenly safe, but that my place in it had a chair with my name still on it. Thanksgiving came 2 weeks later, bringing with it a cold snap that put a thin crust of ice on the birdbath and turned every breath into smoke. The maple tree out front stood bare but dignified, and inside my house smelled exactly the way it has smelled every November for 50 years, like turkey and sage and butter and a little bit of panic. Carolyn arrived early with the kids, cheeks pink from the cold, arms full of grocery bags, and a new, modestly sized pumpkin pie. Michael came in behind them, carrying folding chairs and a box. He set the box on the kitchen table and opened it without ceremony. Inside, cushioned in old newspaper, lay the rooster clock, its painted tail feathers chipped but colorful. "Figured we should let him crow 1 more year," he said, glancing up at me. And there was something like apology in that look, or at least acknowledgment. "We'll see if he remembers how to tell time," I replied, feeling an unexpected lump in my throat as I watched him climb on the step stool, my step stool, to hang it back in its old spot. The smudge on the wall disappeared behind its round, silly face, and when he plugged it in, the second hand started its familiar, slightly too fast tick. Later, as we all sat around the table, Helen included, with a store-bought salad she insisted counted as cooking, the train set from the basement, humming along the edge of the dining room, on a track Michael and Tyler had reassembled, I looked around at the faces lit by the soft overhead light. Emma stealing olives, Tyler arguing about football teams, Caroline laughing at something Helen said about the choir director's new perm, Michael listening more than he spoke, his hand resting lightly on Caroline's shoulder. The papers were not on the table. They were in a folder in the desk drawer now, copies with Evan, copies with me, everything labeled and dated, but their presence was felt in the ease with which we ate, in the absence of that sharp, unspoken tension that had been curled between us for months. Carolyn caught my eye at one point, her expression unguarded, and mouthed, "Thank you." And I wasn't entirely sure whether she meant for the food or for the boundaries or for both. After everyone had gone and the dishwasher was churning away, I stood alone in the kitchen, the rooster clock ticking over my shoulder, a faint ring of flour still on the counter where Emma had helped with the rolls. My knee ached, my back was tired, and yet I felt more solid, more myself than I had in a long time. I knew this wasn't the end of hard conversations. There would be more doctor's appointments, more discussions about stairs and bathtubs, and whether I should still be driving in 5 years. My body would keep changing whether I liked it or not, and one day some of the safeguards we'd put in place might have to be used. I wasn't naive enough to think a few signatures and a heartfelt talk had solved everything. But we had, together, moved something heavy from one side of the room to the other without letting it crush me. And that counted for more than I'd realized it would. I wiped the counter, turned off the light, and paused in the doorway, looking back at the table where so much of this had played out. The brochures and the bank forms and the highlighted lines and the pot roast and the turkey and Caroline's hands twisting in her lap. That old wooden table had seen me be a young wife, a harried mother, a grieving widow, and now a woman in her late 70s, insisting, gently but firmly, that she still got a say. If you've sat through all this with me, listening to my small dramas and my highlighted questions, maybe you've felt a little of yourself in this house, in this kitchen, in this woman trying not to be quietly rearranged. If my story felt like you, like your name ending up on papers you didn't choose or your life being discussed over coffee as if you were already halfway gone, I hope you remember this. You are allowed to pause before you pick up the pen. You're allowed to ask someone to read the fine print with you, someone who sees you as a person and not just a problem to solve. You're allowed to sit at your own table and say, "Wait, explain that again," even if it annoys the people who are only trying to help. You don't have to slam doors or burn bridges. You don't have to shout or run away. You can start smaller than that, with one phone call, one question, one quiet no or not yet that makes a little more room for your own voice. And if the house of your life feels like everyone else has moved the furniture, you're allowed to slide one chair back to where you can reach it, to claim at least one corner, one drawer, one heartbeat that is fully, stubbornly, and beautifully yours.